The governor of Ukraine's northern Chernihiv region says Russian forces have continued to attack built-up areas, despite Moscow's promise of a drastic reduction in military activity there. But Ukraine's military says it has seen some individual Russian units withdraw from positions near Kyiv. It comes as the United Nations says 4 million Ukrainians have now fled the country since the invasion began last month. John Donnison reports.
If there are finally small hints of optimism in Ukraine, it doesn't feel that way on the roads outside Kyiv. Here, the damage has been done. In this village, Ukrainian soldiers are on the ground having just retaken it from the Russians, part of a pushback that may have forced a shift in tactics from Moscow.
I'm fighting for my land. You know, no matter where I go, I'm coming back home. And I always have this feeling, I'm back home now.
After more than a month of fighting, many are weary. But for Ukraine's president, progress in peace talks does not mean it's time to relax.
Yes, we can call positive the signals we hear from the negotiating platform. But these signals do not silence the explosion of the Russian shells. Of course, we see all the risks. Of course, we see no reason to trust the words of certain representatives of a state that continues to fight for our destruction. Ukrainians are not naive people.
Until now, the strategically important northern city of Chernihiv has also been a target of the Russians. But Ukrainian and American officials are warning that Moscow's pledge to scale back its operation here, as well as around the capital Kyiv, could just be a tactic designed to mislead. There's certainly no let-up in Russia's assault in the southeast. At least 12 people were killed yesterday in this strike on a Ukrainian government building in Mykolaiv. And new satellite images show the extent of the damage in Mariupol, still besieged by Russian forces. The war, which has forced more than 10 million people from their homes, is far from over. John Donnison, BBC News.
Officials of Ukraine's northern Chernihiv region say Russian forces have continued to shell civilian areas, despite Moscow saying it was going to reduce military activity there, as well as around Kyiv. Speaking to the BBC, the mayor of Chernihiv city, Viacheslav Chaus, was sceptical about Moscow's promise.
If the
practice and long experience of relations between Ukraine and Russia were such that you could trust at least one word by the Russians, this would be good news. But I want to know that it was only yesterday when inhuman artillery shelling of several residential areas of the city took place, where about 35 people were hospitalized, where people lost their legs and some people were killed. And often the Russians say one thing, but a different thing actually happens. Only time will show how much truth is in those words.
The Kremlin says that Russian and Ukrainian negotiators didn't achieve any breakthroughs during their talks in Turkey on Tuesday. A Kremlin spokesman said a lot of work was still to be done. Let's go live to Moscow and speak to our correspondent Jenny Hill. Jenny, when these talks broke up yesterday, they seemed an unusual level of optimism. But how are things looking 24 hours later?
Yeah, and I'm not sure that really the mood was one of such great optimism. Even the leader of the Russian delegation was still adamant that the two sides essentially remained a very long way apart. Even state media last night, this morning, running headlines saying, could this be the road to peace? But actually, when you read through the body of the text, most note that actually what Ukraine's proposals are very unlikely to be met with enthusiasm by the Kremlin. And we've just heard, as you say, from the Kremlin spokesperson. I suppose it's worth pointing out that when the Russian side yesterday said that they would dramatically reduce military activity around Kyiv and Chernihiv, they did say this isn't a ceasefire, and they did also say that they would be publishing details of that de-escalation. Now, they haven't done that yet, so we don't really know what they meant when they said that they would dramatically reduce military activity, or when that might happen. From the beginning of this process, the question has been raised, rightly, how serious is the Kremlin about negotiating peace in Ukraine? And, before you answer that, you have to take into account, of course, what Russia is currently doing. It's continuing its belligerent language, talking about needing to denazify Ukraine. It has promised, just hours before it talked about de-escalation around Kyiv and Chernihiv, it was talking about shifting its focus, intensifying its military efforts in the Donbass region, in the east of the country. And ultimately, its demands, what it wants out of this military activity, are still demands which Ukraine will find very difficult in many instances to meet. The West may find some of those demands a bit too much also, and we know that some of the Ukrainian proposals may also not find favour with the Kremlin. So, these are extremely difficult times, and I think when the Kremlin talks in certainly terms which are far from optimistic about what's happening here, I think we are getting an accurate sense from them. They are a long way from achieving anything, but the question remains, how serious are they about achieving anything here?
From here in Ukraine, Jenny, it's very difficult to try and work out exactly what Russia is trying to achieve as a final goal. Do we know what that might be now, or does it keep changing?
It's very difficult to pin that down because, of course, this is really down to one man, Vladimir Putin, and all we have to go on are what he has written and what he's said in recent weeks and months. You can conclude from some of that he thinks Ukraine ought to be under Russian control, the whole of the country. The Kremlin has said that it doesn't want regime change in Kyiv, but it has also, in recent weeks, described the government there as neo-Nazis, terrorists and drug addicts. We know its demand is that it certainly wants the independence of parts of eastern Ukraine recognised internationally. Effectively, that means brought under Russian control. We know for certain that Russia wants Crimea, which it annexed in 2014, to be internationally recognised as Russian, and we know that it does not want Ukraine to ever join NATO. Now, on that last point, we know that Ukraine might well agree to that. But, beyond that, Vladimir Putin has repeatedly cast Ukraine, NATO and the West as enemies of Russia and entities which are wanting to do Russia harm. And so it's very difficult really to conclude what the end game is here and how far Vladimir Putin is prepared to go to get it.